It's time to level up your learning experience.
It's time to level up.
Welcome to the Level Up Learning Show.
Hey, welcome back everyone to the Level Up Learning Show. My name is Jarod Bormann. I'm an instructional designer for AEA Learning Online, and this is the educational show that is all about covering the topics that help educators take their current status of learning and teaching and elevate it to the next level. Today's topic is going to be an important one with social emotional learning, and we are bringing in a co-host, and we're bringing back none other than Melissa Wicklund. Hey, Melissa's back as co-host. What's new, Melissa?
I am excited to be here. It's sunshine and 51 today. Thanksgiving's tomorrow.
I was going to say, it's also Turkey Week, Turkey Day tomorrow. What are your plans for Thanksgiving?
Hanging out with my parents and some extended family tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm excited. How about you?
I'm always excited because I don't mind food. I like it. And 9 times out of 10, that leads to some type of comatose nap for me. That's a minimum of 3 hours in the afternoon. And for a lot of teachers, a lot of educators out there, when they're taking this time to take a break, to step away for a second, sometimes the body just shuts down. It
needs some rest time. It needs some rebooting.
That's right. It needs rebooting. It needs to recharge the batteries a little bit. So, nobody should ever feel bad for letting their batteries recharge or taking the time to step away. It's all a part of making sure that we maintain a strong mental health in the career of education. And really, that's the main topic of our entire conversation today. But before we dive into our actual interview that we had a chance to conduct with our special guest, did you bring a show and tell today?
I did.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to introduce it or should we just watch it and react?
Well, let's watch it and react.
Guess what? You can. That's all I got. Toodaloo.
That is quite possibly the cutest thing I have ever seen.
It's short, simple, but it just puts a smile on your face. She has the cutest voice, and she just gives these positive affirmations that I just can't get enough of. So
this is from, it looks like TikTok user Charlotte Ann Tucker.
Yes.
Charlotte Ann Tucker. So, does she have a lot, is her little name, is the little girl's name Charlotte, or is it like her channel, or?
I think it is her name. And she has a ton of just short, sweet videos.
So she's like a positive affirmation kind of person.
Definitely. Yes. You could just, if you're having a bad day, just swipe through her TikTok stream and you can watch them over and over again. It never gets old. Just puts a smile on my face.
Fantastic. So you could bookmark those and obviously save them. Let's get to our guest. Honestly, I'm really excited about our particular guest because Mandy has been a good friend of mine, and a little story of how Mandy and I met. Okay. So this was probably 2017. 2017. It's when the ISTE conference was last in Denver. And so at 2017, her and I was involved in this Twitter chat group for more like professional learning. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, starting an acquaintance there just digitally through Twitter and essentially knowing the person through a little, thumbnail icon of theirs. But then at the conference, I found out she was going to be there, and we didn't even plan on going to this session together. But I'm getting ready to kind of sit down, and I am a little more introverted. You know me, you're more introverted. And so going to this conference, one of the largest there is, was quite intimidating. I'm not going to lie. And so I went into this session and I'm kind of looking around. I'm like, she kind of looks familiar. And I was trying to put my thumb on it a little bit. And it's I think that's Mandy. So I kind of bit the bullet. I don't walk up to people naturally and be like, hey, are you so-and-so? But I did, and I'm glad I did, because she's like, oh my gosh, hey, what's going on? And so we met each other that way. We sat through that session, did some learning, but then also just became really good friends after that. I joke around because she kind of like, she's definitely more extroverted than what I am. And so she kind of like adopted me as her little introverted friend, and then just like, oh, let me introduce you to this person and this person and this person. And it's like, she's the reason why I even was able to meet anybody else at that conference, honestly. Otherwise, I would have gone to that conference, come back, and probably had zero conversations with people. And I'm so glad that I met her there, and just over time have continued to stay in touch. So when we knew that we were going to be doing the topic of SEL, I was like, hey, I know someone that definitely has an on this. And so I guess her expertise that she's been working on for the last few years has been in the area of social emotional learning. She's written a couple books on it. I've been fortunate enough to submit a vignette for one of them. And so it's just really, really cool to see what she's doing, because she was getting in on this subject before COVID. And I know that our podcast isn't always about pre-COVID and post-COVID. I get it. But like, it's really hard not to talk about this particular topic without bringing that event that definitely affected the area of social emotional learning. So anything else you want to add before we get into our interview?
No, you brought up introverted. It's nice to have those extroverted friends so that we can kind of step out of our box in a safe way.
That's right. Exactly right. An emotional, psychological, safe way. And she even talks a little bit about that psychological safety. So let's get to our interview with Mandy Froehlich.
It's time to level up.
So on the topic of SEL, and to clarify for the entire audience, social emotional learning, what have you been doing in that area, either on a grand scale, or what are some things that you're seeing? Obviously, we know that COVID put an entire spotlight on that entire topic. So I guess maybe speak of, what you've been up to the last few years in terms of that topic.
Yeah, I think because like with any big topic that comes around in education that everybody starts talking about, there are so many misconceptions out there about what SEL actually is. And so from the beginning of the pandemic, I've been talking about SEL for much longer, but I always felt like I had to start. I needed a foundation. I needed to even discuss what it was before the pandemic. I still have to do that. The pandemic hasn't changed that, because it's been thrown out in so many different ways that people they get SEL mixed up with trauma. They get trauma mixed up with, like any kind of behavior system that's in a school. They get SEL mixed up with that. And then there's interventions throwing in there somehow. And so the biggest issue I think with SEL right now is actually the misconception of what it actually is. So a lot of the work that I do is just level setting on that. It's about talking about what it actually is. I lean heavily on the CASEL competencies. So going through that, giving people some, vocabulary, some things that are just a little bit more, that feel more solid than talking about social emotional learning. Because like anytime you talk about emotions and behaviors, it feels very abstract. For me, the CASEL competencies are very specific and actionable. And so I do a lot of that. Also discussing how SEL looks in the classroom, from the standpoint of the idea that everybody has SEL, like SEL is not an intervention. It's not a behavior modification tool. And I hear these things in school districts a lot. I was working with a district a couple weeks ago that the teachers told me that when they had behavior challenges in their classroom, the answer from administration was to quote unquote do SEL. And so like these are the types of things that I try to address in what I'm what I'm doing is really just defining level setting, helping teachers recognize it in their classroom. That's where we are right now. Even after the pandemic, we haven't really gotten much further than that.
That's interesting. Doing SEL, almost treating it like a verb versus the fact that it's a topic, it's a noun, it's a thing, and trying to verb it, whatever. You know what I'm trying to say? Like trying to turn it into a verb isn't necessarily meaning that you're exactly doing it and doing it effectively. So, I mean, Melissa, what is what are you kind of seeing, or what led you to see as a need to start developing maybe some of the SEL courses that we're now starting to push out? Or what are you hearing from Mandy where you're kind of seeing as a commonality as well?
Well, really, my journey with SEL started when I was in the classroom, when I taught fourth grade, which is several years ago now. But really, it came about during the pandemic. I had both my children at home. My daughter was transitioning from 8th grade. I had her in 8th grade, and then she transitioned to high school right after COVID. And so I saw some of those things come up when she was dealing with new friendships, trying to make her way in high school. And so it really became something that I wanted to put out there for teachers to have in their toolbox, right? Not something that they can do, but as a tool for them to utilize for all students. And so I, on our system, have created 3 modules for students and teachers to utilize, and they are about emotional first aid kit. What can we have in our toolkit on a daily basis that can really help us? Stress management, and then critical conversations or heart-to-heart conversations, some of those conversations that are hard to have, not only with parents, your friends, your teachers, and how can we talk better with those people. And so the first question I have for you, Mandy, is what can we put in our emotional first aid kits that we can use on a day-to-day basis? What are some things that you recommend for teachers, for students?
Yeah, I think as far as when we start to talk about any kind of emotional disengagement, needing to try to find a space where we can re-engage with what we're doing again, whether that means, it's over a long-term emotional disengagement, like it's been happening over time, or it's an immediate need in a classroom where we're having one of those moments that's overwhelming and we need to decompress just for a second of our prep. I think that what I usually recommend for those sort of first aid kits that you can have is anything addressing items in there by your senses, by your 5 senses. And so something that you can see that makes you happy or brings you joy. It's usually a picture, right? Like some sort of thing that reminds you of a happy time. Something that you can taste. So keeping a piece of chocolate in there or whatever it is that brings you joy in eating. That would be pretty much any food for me. Like you could literally put any food in there and I'd be like, oh, food brings me joy, so we're just going to eat that. But going through the 5 senses and finding things for that kit that you can go through that can really help, as well as any kind of notes for yourself or something that you would need to help walk you through, like a breathing exercise as well. I think that's also helpful. Sometimes when we get overwhelmed, we're like, what was that box breathing again? I can't remember how that goes. Or what was hand over heart again? How does that work? Just 3 steps in what you're supposed to be doing to help you breathe or self-regulate can be helpful as well.
Well, you covered things that are in the module, so I appreciate that. Yes, we do talk about the 5 senses and how these modules really address high school students. And so how can they utilize their phones, right? They all have their phones. And so how can they utilize their phones to best meet those emotional needs, that whether it's over time or whether it's in the moment, what can they do? So yes, we have all of those in our module. And I know you work a lot with teachers as well. What are some of those things that you've given? What are those 5 senses or toolbox things that you've given to teachers to work through now that they're back in school? A lot of teachers are struggling. What are some things that you've worked with since the pandemic with the teachers?
Yeah, it's literally no different. The only thing that I would say is that I have a few strategies that I present to teachers that are sort of like in the moment teaching strategies to use. Some of them would be like hand over heart. And so hand over heart, if listeners aren't familiar, is you put one hand on your forehead, one hand on your heart, and you simply breathe into it until you feel a change. And if you want to do extended hand over heart, you move the hand from your forehead to your belly. You keep your other hand on your heart. Again, you breathe into it until you feel a change. And so like some of those little strategies, I use with teachers because when I was a teacher, I didn't have those. And so I found myself doing things like I would make sure that I had a cup of coffee or water so that if a student, like I needed a breath from the student that was right in front of me, I would take a really long drink of whatever it was that I had in front of me. And like, that was the only strategy I had, was to take that extended drink. And so I felt like these strategies would have worked better for me, because if you don't take the moment to work through that, you're just going to keep spiraling until you go home. And so to interrupt that energy and to refocus, is worth it. And so as far as the first aid, emotional first aid kit, I would recommend the same things, the 5 senses stuff. But then also look for strategies in the moment while you're teaching that you can use as well that work for you.
I like all those. Yeah, I didn't have very many strategies when I was a teacher either. So
I just screamed. I just screamed and went out into the hall and cried.
Well, those are strategies. I mean, they're not good ones, but they are strategies.
Yeah. Yeah. No, but that's a good point to know, is just strategies for the teachers look very similar to the strategies for the kids. And so when, I think for those teachers, then they realize we're coping together. We're experiencing emotions together. And how can we do that effectively?
And I think another question that I wanted to ask is about the critical conversations or heart-to-heart conversations. I think they've become more difficult since COVID, just because we were stuck in this bubble, right, with our family. We were all together, and then you went back out and you socialized, and now there might be some difficult conversations, or people have different views than you. What are some things that you talk with teachers about or students about how to have those tough conversations? Yeah.
So and I totally agree with everything you just said. I think especially being even that a lot of teachers, even if they had decent boundaries, in general, as an umbrella rule, teachers struggle with boundaries because they're servants. And so they're constantly trying to do things for other people. And that's not a bad thing from the standpoint of it comes from a good place. And like they're trying to make the world a better place. And that's amazing. Like, we can't argue with that. However, it does limit the amount of time that they spend with themselves. So that tends to mean that they don't have awesome boundaries. And even if they did have good boundaries prior to the pandemic, there were elements of the pandemic that necessitated them dropping those boundaries in order to be able to work through the challenges of the pandemic. And so now, even if they had good boundaries before, they're struggling with not having them now and having to recreate those boundaries again. And I would say that crossing a boundary is probably one of the most common reasons right now, maybe set aside from political things, that we have that require those challenging conversations, or those heart-to-hearts. You have crossed this boundary, and this is what I need. This is what I need from now on. Those are really difficult conversations to have. I think that one of the important things to understand about having heart-to-hearts, or different, the challenging conversations, whatever you want to call them, is that having a difficult conversation with somebody actually indicates a level of trust. You not only have to have the level of trust, but you are also creating a level of trust with that. And what that says, what those conversations say is, I value you enough and I trust you enough to be able to say hard things to you and have you still accept me as a person and still love me as who I am. And instead, we often look at these challenging conversations as, oh my gosh, I'm going to say something that they're not going to like and they're going to hate me afterward. Well, they may not like it. That might be true. However, you're also saying to them, I know you may not want to hear this. I know you may not like this, but I trust you enough to love me anyway and to respect the boundary that I'm setting. And I think that if you go into a conversation, even starting out that way, even saying, like, blatantly saying that, I have something difficult to talk to you about, but I want you to know that I trust you to continue to, like, love me and care for me and all of those things after I say this, because I know we have a relationship like that, that can help sort of be the catalyst or, to a better conversation, even if it's difficult.
I really like that, because it seems like if you don't lead with that, then it could potentially be taken the wrong way and you don't build that psychological safety. But then I think it's also important, let's say, for example, Mandy, if you were in a situation where, like, if I'm a teacher and you're my administrator and most of our interactions were just the tough things and there was never other interactions that was, like, positive and had nothing to do with teaching and just asking about, the general well-being and how was your weekend and stuff like that, then I feel like the more of a wall is built with every one of those interactions versus for the tough conversation, I want to try to have 5 positive, just normal relationship building conversations prior to that,
I was going to say absolutely. And I also think that this is a perfect world, right? Like, in order for me to be able to say that, then say something difficult that you don't like, and for you to be able to accept it, it takes an equal level of self-awareness and, emotional maturity for both of us to be able to have that conversation. And that's just not always the case. And I just wrote a blog post not that long ago that, like, setting the boundary is hard, especially if you're a people pleaser. That's really difficult. But the hardest part of boundaries is actually making sure people follow up on that. Because if you have never had boundaries and you've never had those critical conversations, that first one with that person is all that more difficult. And so the second part, to me, that's the hardest part, is saying to somebody, that we had a conversation about this, like, that's not going to work for me. Like, this is what I need from that. I kind of relate it back sometimes to, like, when we talk about norms. I go into all of these schools that have norms for their meetings, right? This is how we're going to act. We're not going to have our phone out. We're not going to be on the computer. We're not going to be having side conversations. We have all of these norms, but we never ever discuss what happens when somebody breaks that norm, when somebody crosses that boundary. We never talk about that. So then one person takes out their phone and they start looking at it. And then somebody else is like, oh, well, they're looking at their phone and nobody's saying anything, so I'm going to look at my phone too. And then they take out their phone and they start looking, and someone else opens up their computer and someone else starts a side conversation. And it's never stopped because we don't know how to address people breaking those norms or crossing those boundaries. And so for me, those crucial conversations, if that's not a part of the culture, and if that's not a part of somebody who, like, the emotional maturity that everyone can handle, it actually makes everything that much harder, like that much more difficult to have those.
I agree with that. And I think one thing that you brought up is that human connection, or building those relationships. And one way that I just read about a couple days ago was Angela Watson, and I thought it was pretty strong, was spending 2 minutes a day for 10 days with a student to build that relationship, but not talk about school, talk about what they're interested in and building those relationships. And I think that we can do that and then have those tough conversations with maybe some of those students that we need to have that conversation with.
Just real quick, I mean, kind of close it out. Where does trauma fit under the umbrella of SEL?
Yeah, so that would be like the question of the century, right? And I think this comes back to, as educators, we've never been prepared to be counselors to our students, which is in many ways what they need right now. And not that we don't want to, as far as not that we don't want to have the toolkit to be able to help our students. I would say every teacher wants the toolkit to be able to help our students, but that was just never our job. Like, we were there to teach, and our teaching colleges never set us up for that when we were in schools. And so I think that right now what's happening, there's all these terms out there, SEL trauma, and you could keep going on and on and on. I see a lot of memes which drive me crazy that say something to the effect of, like students who have been through trauma, or if they're in some sort of trauma response, can't learn. And it's great. I don't disagree with that. But then what? Because our jobs are to teach. And so if you're telling me that a lot of students are going through trauma right now and they can't learn, then how am I supposed to do my job? So just telling me that doesn't really do me any good. It's not helpful. And so I think when it comes to SEL, everybody has SEL needs. Adults, kids, doesn't matter who it is. Everybody is on sort of their own SEL journey, right? We all have problems or have strengths in self-regulation. We all have problems or strengths in self-management. We're all working through those things. Not everybody has gone through trauma. That's like a subset of the people who also are working through SEL. So students or adults who have gone through trauma, they're neurodivergent. Just having gone through trauma changes your brain. That makes you neurodivergent, which means that not only are they dealing with the SEL stuff, they're also dealing with the trauma stuff. And so they still need those they still have those SEL needs. That's still a thing. But now they have additional needs on top of that are going to have to address some of those trauma behaviors, trauma thoughts, trauma needs, like all of those things. And it's not really different with teachers as adults. It's just depending upon how much they've worked through their trauma. So, for example, there's a concept called the wounded healer that says that people can only help heal other people as far as they have been healed, which would be the same thing as saying, I can only help you self-regulate as well as I can self-regulate. I cannot co-regulate with you if I myself as an adult cannot regulate. So working through some of those things, and it might be because of my trauma. It could be a million different reasons why I have difficulty regulating. But at the same time, that trauma piece is impacting what we do. And I have additional needs as an adult that maybe helped with SEL stuff, but SEL is never going to cure trauma. And I think that's where people start to get a little start to try to embed things in other things that don't fit. Everybody needs SEL help. Everybody needs SEL learning and practice and emotional growth. Everybody needs that. SEL practice is going to help students with trauma. It's going to help everybody. It's going to help students with trauma, but it's not going to cure their trauma. And I think that's one of the ways that we're starting to trying to fit SEL over something that it's not meant to fit over. Also, one of the things that I think is happening is that when it comes to behavior, one of the reasons I hear most often why teachers want to leave or they're struggling or they're really unhappy is student behavior right now. When it comes to behavior, SEL is not going to solve behavior that's rooted in trauma. And I think also there needs to be, SEL is also not a behavior modification tool. It's not a way to determine, like what repercussions need to be taken for students who have trauma behaviors. And so I think what's happening is that administrators, principals, dean of students, they're struggling with like reprimanding students who show trauma behaviors because they don't want to make things worse. And so in essence, they're doing nothing at all. And so there needs to be some sort of program in place there needs to be an understanding and a learning in the area of SEL. There needs to be a district-wide understanding of trauma and supports put in place for those students and teachers. There needs to be also some sort of like whatever it is you subscribe to, conscious discipline, restorative practices, like whatever it is, there needs to be that in place as well. All of them need to be put in place with to complete fidelity. It's not something you can pick and choose what seems easiest or fastest or cheapest or whatever it is. All of them need to be put in with fidelity. If you do those things, you are going to see an improvement in the climate and culture and needs of the building. That was a really long answer to your question. Sorry about that.
I feel like a mic drop just needed to happen on that one. So a little bit of reflection from that interview. The one thing that I took away that I think as I'm trying to think about sort of like, your course that you're putting together, but more so as like some of the districts that we may serve in the area is the idea that social emotional learning or SEL is not an intervention.
So powerful.
Right. And the way she talked about like, if you're a school and let's say your professional learning for that PD day or half day is SEL, you aren't actually putting in place an intervention. You're covering a topic and you might be providing some tools, much like what your course is like, mm-hmm. but you're not necessarily, you can't say we are doing SEL, that idea of not verbanizing it, like turn it into a verb. You can't do that. It's a thing by itself. That for me was kind of eye opening because even through Twitter and other places, you hear people have that conversation about it. But I think that's one big takeaway that I'm going to keep with me from this particular interview. How about you?
I think the one that I took away was districts spend money on professional development. And one thing that she talked about was no amount of money you spend on ed tech is going to fix SEL. So you can't just buy these programs that are related to social emotional learning, or you can't provide professional development just like you talked about, and it's just going to solve all the issues, the behavior issues, the trauma issues. It's not going to solve it. Like, we need to be every day purposefully putting into practice some things that deal with social emotional learning for our students and ourselves, right? It's not just these ed tech things that are going to fix it. So that was my big takeaway.
So the way I'm kind of interpreting it is I know that when I was back in the school district before joining the Learning Online team is this idea of the three tiers, the 3-tier intervention system. Mm-hmm. And so it feels like, everybody is tier 1 intervention. If you got a student who's if 80% of your classroom is really struggling with the concept, we put in a certain type of level 1 intervention that's kind of whole class or small group, right? So that kind of feels like what your course is offering here. Like, there are some tools, some things to put in your toolbox to apply at kind of like a tier 1 level. Am I getting that right? Okay.
Yes.
And so then like tier 2 or tier 3 would be more like those students. And we got onto the topic of trauma, the students that are dealing with trauma in a more severe way. Mm-hmm. And maybe there are things within the school day that might trigger this for them. Then we need to have more of an intervention based at a tier 2, tier 3 level that will hopefully address that and hopefully get the kid the help they need at probably like a counseling level of some kind, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that's how I'm interpreting all of this. I'm kind of learning this as we go, but I love the fact that you recognize the need and you were saying, we need more help at a tier 1 level. How can I do that? And you were able to put that together. And where are you with that course building right now, Melissa, for everybody listening?
So this partnership that I've built with Work to Be Well on the West Coast is coming out with updates to their courses, and they keep building as well. And so right now there are 3 completed modules in our system for grades 9 through 12. We have the emotional toolkit. And so looking at what kinds of tools can high schoolers use on an everyday practice, what can they be using? Mandy talked about the 5 senses. That's what the module is about. We also have stress management. High schoolers get stressed. They have a lot going on. Sports, academics.
No, they don't know what stress is. They're not adults yet.
That social media piece, though, can really stress out a kid. So
yeah, I would agree. Yep.
So there's that stress management, and then heart-to-heart conversations, critical conversations, tough conversations. That's what the other module is about. And I think she addressed that as well with you have to be on the same emotional level, and teachers and kids are not on the same emotional level. And so how can we have those conversations in a way that both people come out of there thinking, yes, we can have these conversations and move forward.
I think if anything really comes about of this conversation, and I'm not trying to make light of, I'm sort of mocking the things that I know that I've heard parents say when their kid is legitimately dealing with stress. Mm-hmm. And, they just need to toughen up, or they need to suck it up, or man, they think they're stressed now, wait till they're, full adults and have right. bills and taxes and stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, they're going to have that. But what are the coping mechanisms we're giving them to be able to push through in stressful moments? Because high amount of stress, as we know, can lead to all kinds of other breakdowns in health, in mental health, but not just physical health, but mental health. Like that stuff adds up. And so I think if anything, hopefully social emotional learning helps the adults, the students, and everybody become more empathetic in the process of learning. Because the process of learning, when you add other things to that process, does make more stress. So building helps us build the empathy in some way, so that therefore we can get to learning more effectively. Well, Melissa, it has been an honor once again to have you a part of the show. Always love co-hosting with you, and hopefully you have a good Thanksgiving with your family, and I will be sure to overeat once again and take my nap.
You as well. Have a great time.
All right. Well, take care.
Thanks.
That's going to do it for today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode. A special thanks to my co-host, Melissa Wicklund, as well as our special guest, Mandy Froehlich. If you want to check out any of the resources or links from this particular episode, you can find them on our website, aealearningonline.org/leveluplearning. Or you can go ahead and follow us or subscribe to any of the social media channels that we have over here. And if you want, while you're there, be sure to comment, ask us questions. We want to interact with our listeners and keep the conversation and the learning going. That's going to do it for us here. We'll see you next time on the Level Up Learning Show.